Hello, everyone, and welcome to this short talk with me today on why L&D alone won't solve your problems and the reasons why that is. Now, the reason why I've decided to talk about this in a bit more detail and I suppose deep dive around this subject is that I find within the workplace learning and education industry that many of us are faced with the fact that people think that by rolling out a quote unquote L&D solution, it will solve all of their organizational problems. And if you're in the industry like myself, you will know that 9 times out of 10, this really isn't the case. And this is a subject that I've been talking about quite a lot in the last 18 months and looking at actually what are the bigger factors that play into enabling real change in an organization and allowing people to evolve, whether it's their skills or behaviors or mindset. And actually, it's much larger than L&D itself. And building L&D products, solutions, or tools alone, in my opinion, won't solve 99% of the supposed workplace performance problems that we have. Now, something else I often say is that what a business identifies as an L&D problem most of the time, it's not usually an L&D problem. And I say this a lot because what will happen in many cases is you will have your senior leaders and stakeholders who might identify a performance issue within their teams or the business overall or the culture of the organization and immediately try to solve that issue with L&D and using L&D as some kind of one trick pony that fits all and can solve any problems. But in reality, that is not really the case. And we actually have to take a bit of a step back here and think about, in a modern workplace today, what is the role of a learning function and how does it actually support a business? And again, for me, workplace learning teams exist to help people get better at what they need to do at work, so which is the performance side. And very importantly, as a human, so how do they develop human skills, change behaviors or evolve behaviors? Now, what I would like to see more of in the learning industry, and it's something we can definitely involve, is to adopt a coaching and consultative approach that allows workplace learning teams to kind of enable these learning moments, unlock new potential, and generally guide people in the right direction on their journey. Now, it's not an instructional process from the way I see it. It's more about workplace learning teams acting as an agent of change, which shares new ideas, knowledge, and tools that will spark growth. So, if we go back to our original statement at the beginning of this talk, why am I saying that L&D alone can't solve these workplace problems? There's a couple of things around this, right? So I highly believe that L&D should be seen as a key part of the problem solving process in any organization and the problems that they have. In my own opinion, if I was actually looking to define what a learning team is today, we're more like performance consultants, right? And we're more looking at performance engineering. L&D is a really big part of that problem solving process, but in the grand scheme of kind of organization change and transformation, we really play a small part. We really play a smaller part than probably the collective business might imagine. And I can give you an example of this where we look at typical programs that are seen as L&D, such as unconscious bias training, which is particularly popular in many business over the last few years. And many organizations will look to L&D to solve kind of blanket any unconscious bias issues that might exist in the business. But actually, this is impossible for L&D as a function to do because unconscious bias is a cultural and behavioral change that needs to take place. L&D can play its part in that problem solving process, but by no means is involving an L&D team to deliver a stereotypical and archaic training solution going to move the kind of dial in terms of unconscious bias in your business. And this is where you see a lot of workplace learning teams and organizations fail because they take the same old approach, going round in circles, and they end up doing the same thing every 6 months. And their measurement of success is saying, well, we gave our 10,000 people on our workforce, all of this unconscious bias instructional training, they should now not be biased unconsciously, which is ridiculous, right? That's not how it works. It takes time and it involves a lot more parties than L&D to actually do that. And that puts L&D in a real, precarious position in terms of actually what can they do and why is it that L&D aren't going to solve those organizational problems alone. And this quite nicely connects me to my next point, which is all around factors that affect change. So this one slide does more than anything I can probably articulate to you. The fact that this shows the factors that actually affect change and actually how small a part L&D plays in that. So on my screen here, you can kind of see this map that I've made in terms of all the factors that affect change. And the key ones are people, culture, curiosity, ingrained behaviors, and then you can just see L&D in the bottom right hand corner of your screen. These are all the factors that you will need to consider when you're looking to create change in behaviors or skills or habits or mindsets in a business. So let's break down some of these, okay? So people. So firstly, you always need to think about the people in your business. What's your community like? How do they actually operate in their daily workflow? What's their view of the problems that you're trying to solve right now? Because when working on any problem, it's really key that we understand what people in this environment think right now. What are their thoughts, what are their feelings, and what's the know-how they have today? And then where do you want them to be? And to get answers to these questions, it kind of comes back to the thing I'm always preaching, which is around asking more questions and the right questions to get meaningful data from your people to understand this. Then culture. Culture is hugely influential on whether you can create change in a business and get people to change their thinking and change their behaviors. You've got to consider a few things. Number one, what does the culture of your organization look like today? What are the belief systems and values that you encourage? And what are the ones that specifically represent your community today? So solving any problem really becomes complex if you're not able to recognize and understand the culture of your organization right now. And when I say right now, I don't mean the one that your leadership wants it to be and probably talks about often in team meetings and communications. I'm talking about the one that actually is right now. You need to be really honest and reflect on where is that culture today, because it plays an essential part in people recognizing the problem you're trying to solve and really wanting to act upon it and make the change that you seek. So remember, culture rules all in any situation. And then quite nicely, this leads on to behaviors. So I think this is one of the probably biggest undervalued and underestimated portions of trying to make any change with skills or behaviors or mindset is actually understanding people's current programming. How do they think from a psychological aspect? What does that look like across your culture? What are the ingrained behaviors you have now? Or a better way of saying it, what are the established and programmed behaviors you might need to consider that currently exist that may be barriers to the change you're trying to make? And it's, as I say, something that's really undervalued, really underestimated, but it shouldn't be, because it's absolutely essential in you achieving what you need to do with any organizational change. There's a lot to be explored in the behavioral programming of your whole workforce, because if you're doing something that threatens that existing programming, it's highly likely people are going to be resistant to change. And something that can help in this work with ingrained behaviors is looking at what your senior leaders role model now, because teams will look to senior leaders and think, how are they behaving? What are they role modeling? And they'll adopt that. People might say they won't, but they definitely do. They look to the people who are in leadership roles, who are more experienced, for guidance, whether consciously or unconsciously, in terms of how they should operate in the workplace. And like I say, you can roll out all the resources, courses, and tools all year long. But if your large population of people have specific program behaviors, and your leaders don't role model the desired behaviors, habits, and mindset you want, then why are the rest of your people going to do that? And it, as I say, gigantic factor to overlook, along with quite closely curiosity. So curiosity is always a difficult thing I find in this profession. We're always trying to force people to do stuff, but we never actually measure the curiosity level or trying to encourage a certain amount of curiosity amongst the workforce to actually get them to be more curious, to be more explorative, and actually looking at growing and not being in a fixed state. Now, I always say that curiosity killed the cat, but for us as humans, it's probably the key to unlocking kind of big growth. And for me, to evolve a culture, people need to have a certain amount of curiosity in their own work, in their life, and in that particular subject. It could be the magic ingredient that really makes change stick. Yet, it's not going to be easy to influence. And it's not really something you can build. I've heard people talk about building curiosity as a skill. I don't think it's a skill. It's more of a behavioral trait, but it's definitely something you can encourage and influence as much as possible to try to get people to be more curious about their career, the way they operate, and how they can do things to become a better human overall. So it's a little bit trendy at the moment, curiosity, in some extent, some organizations, but it's very akin to a terminology of kind of fixed versus growth mindset. So the people who want to grow and the people who just don't change, and actually not changing holds them back. And it's really helpful to understand and recognize what your people's kind of first is to grow. What is their curiosity? You can do this once more by asking more questions that will get you some meaningful data and asking the right questions. It's going to make you better prepared to create something that actually piques people's curiosity. If you don't consider the ingrained behaviors of your workforce and their curiosity level, for me, it's going to be difficult to be part of a solution and create a solution that's actually going to affect change, because these are two very, very important factors. And then that leads us to the kind of final element, which you can see in the bottom right hand corner of your screen, which is L&D, which for me is a tool in this toolkit of change. And it's often used as the delivery mechanism to get content out or to actually execute on that change. But really, it's a small part of the process, and it should be involved as part of that decision making council, that problem solving council, but it's not going to be the thing that on its own can go out and solve everything. So to recap on that, the factors that are really going to affect change at an organizational level are going to be your people, your culture, understanding the ingrained behaviors and programming today, and measuring curiosity and encouraging curiosity, and then working with the L&D function and other areas of the business to take on board all these factors and get that data, and then look to build a solution that considers all of these areas working together. Because as I said at the top of this talk, if you just push out an L&D solution, it's not going to create much change. You need to be involved from a side of people, so internal communications teams working with you. You need to be working on other cultural events. You need to be looking at people's behaviors and influencing that as well. And this is why L&D alone is not going to solve your problems. And as I've mentioned already, it's why so many workplace learning teams kind of fall at this hurdle, organizations fall at this hurdle, because they're not really affecting change. Because the change is not affecting, they do the same thing every 6 months because they don't consider the larger factors at play that sit outside the world of L&D and that delivery mechanism, and then always looking at problems across the business as an L&D problem and L&D solving that. So that is kind of a run through of the factors that, really do affect change and why L&D alone cannot do that. But before finishing this, let me just share with you a few ideas that you can take away and apply to actually change this in your own world, if you're involved in workplace learning or you're in an education team. So there's a couple of things that you can do to actually make sure that the problem solving process that hopefully you're a part of and delivering can actually affect some real change. So one is to build trust and strong relationships with different teams across the business, work with your marketing teams, work with internal comms, be really close to your senior leaders, because these people form a key part of the employee experience. You need to help these people recognize it is a team effort. We are going to have to all collaborate to make a change. Secondly, ask your people more questions more often. You need to get a feel of the culture. You need to be tapped into that. So get a feel of the culture today and not just what you want it to be. It's good to be clear on where you want it to be, but always get a clear understanding of where you are today. Gather data and evidence. Try not to be opinion led. And then lastly, look to examples and case studies for people who've done this before. There's a bunch of organizations that are really forward thinking and innovative and are doing lots of stuff like this now. What are they doing right now? What can you learn from them? Getting the right external data can certainly help you influence your internal audience and stakeholders to understand what you see on your screen now and get around to that model of that L&D alone is not going to solve your problems. So next time you're in part of these conversations where your business is saying to you, we have an L&D problem, and you think it's not an L&D problem, come and reflect on some of the things that we have covered in this talk today, and you might be able to change the way your business behaves and actually build solutions that are going to affect change.